Okay, folks, welcome back. This is Whale Fest, the April 14th symposium. We had a lot of very interesting presentations this morning on a kind of kelp, on whale disentanglement and rescue, on recycled materials, on agricultural program in the Monterey Bay Sanctuary. And this afternoon, we have a really great lineup. I'd like to thank Access Monterey Peninsula for taping this today and helping us with the audio visuals. Great job. And also thank the sponsors of this event, Whale Fest Monterey, that we have today. And I am Dan Hafley. I'm your MC for today. I'm on the board of Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, and we are one of the sponsors of today's event. So I would like to introduce our first afternoon speaker, who is working at the Monterey Bay Aquarium on their Otter Surrogacy program, and the name of her presentation is Working with Monterey Bay Aquarium's Otter Surrogacy program, oddly enough. Katie Finch has worked in marine mammal husbandry and conservation for almost a decade. She started her career as a volunteer at UCSC's Pinniped Cognition and Sensory Systems Laboratory, followed by 7 years working as a mammologist at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach. She has been a rehabilitator with Monterey Bay Aquarium's Sea Otter program for over 2 years. Welcome, Katie.
All right. Thanks for coming, guys. Like he said, my name is Katie, and I've been working at the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Sea Otter program for about 2 years now. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about the program that we have at the Monterey Bay Aquarium that helps to rescue and rehabilitate sea otters off of our coastline here. If you have been to the Monterey Bay Aquarium and seen some of the exhibitry that we have around the sea otter areas, you might have seen a little bit of what we do, but hopefully I'm going to be able to give you a little bit more detail, a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain into our process for rehabilitating sea otters. I want to start off with everything that I'm going to show in this presentation is authorized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the permit number that is in that bottom corner there. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about southern sea otters in the Monterey Bay and our kind of relationship with them. So if you are observant at all, you've probably seen sea otters off of our coastline here. We have a really dense population of sea otters that live right off of Cannery Row and off Pacific Grove. So you're pretty likely to see them if you're around here at all. But that little snapshot is not necessarily a great representation of how sea otters are doing out in their natural habitat as a whole. The sea otter population is actually very reduced compared to the historical numbers that we used to see of southern sea otters along the coast of North America. So if you look at that map that we have over on the right-hand side, you'll see the yellow that goes along that coastline. That's the historic range of southern sea otters. We used to see them all the way from Baja California up through the Pacific Northwest into the Oregon coast area. And now we really only see sea otters in the area that we consider the central coast of California. And that's still due to the fur trade that started in the early 1700s and lasted until the early 1900s. And unfortunately, we went from having potentially over 100,000 sea otters along our coastline to the population actually, at that point, a very, very small population of about 50 individuals that survived off of the Big Sur coastline, likely just because of inaccessibility. But thankfully, we now today have about 3,000 animals. So because of things like the Northern Pacific Fur Seal Treaty of 1911 that restricted hunting of sea otters, and more contemporary legislation like the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, sea otters are now very protected, and we have about 3,000 animals off of our coastline. But sea otters are incredibly important. They're not just adorable and fun to look at. They're actually very important to the ecosystem in which they live. And probably the most important example of just how important they are is their relationship with kelp forests. So if you know much about sea otters, you've probably heard the term keystone species tossed around. That means a species is so important to the ecosystem in which it lives that it's sort of like the keystone in an archway. So if you take that stone out of an arch, it can collapse. The same goes for a keystone species in its ecosystem. If you remove it, that ecosystem can collapse. So a really good example of this is with sea otters and giant kelp and purple sea urchins. So purple sea urchins are sort of the enemy of our kelp forest, even though they're a native species. If there's an overabundance of purple sea urchins in a kelp forest, they can take a healthy kelp forest ecosystem and turn it into this. This is what we call an urchin barren. So purple sea urchins really like to munch on the holdfast of giant kelp, sort of like the root system of the kelp. So they can really decimate a kelp forest. And unfortunately, because of purple sea urchins, many of the kelp forests along our coast over the last century have turned into these urchin barrens. Sea otters help out with this by having a really giant appetite for purple sea urchins and other invertebrates like them. So sea otters don't have blubber like a lot of other marine mammals. They have instead this really, really dense fur. It's actually the densest fur of any mammal. And they also have a super fast metabolism. So they're constantly eating, they're constantly foraging for invertebrates like purple sea urchins. So when sea otters are in this kelp forest ecosystem, they help balance things out. They eat those purple sea urchins, and they help to keep their populations in check. I'm actually going to go ahead and skip this slide. And then so, like I said, sea otters are incredibly important to protect. This is actually a video that I took of a mom and pup sea otter down in Morro Bay. I'm going to talk a little bit later about just how important the relationship between a sea otter pup and its mom is. But yeah, we'll go ahead and skip ahead. And let's go through one more. This is the longer version of the presentation. And then one more. There we go. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the aquarium and our rehabilitation efforts over the last several decades. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium has been involved in sea otter conservation for pretty much the entirety of its existence. So the aquarium opened in 1984, and that same year, keepers at the aquarium rehabilitated several sea otters that became the first exhibit animals there. And continuing on from that, we developed a program that will rescue stranded sea otters, rehabilitate them, and release them. There's actually two branches of the sea otter program. There's the otter care program that are the ones who respond to stranded sea otters and care for them. And then there's the research and tracking side of our team. And they are the ones who are really kind of keeping tabs on the population off of our coastline, both the animals that we are releasing and also the general population we have here. And so they do a lot of research and put out a lot of really cool studies. So the two teams work together really closely, especially when we release otters, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. For those of us who are working directly with the animals to rehabilitate them, you might, if you've been to the aquarium, you might recognize these cool outfits that we get to wear. These are what we call our disguises. We wear these when we are handling the sea otters or interacting with them in order to sort of minimize how much human contact the sea otters are getting. We don't want them to associate us with positive things like food. We don't want them to be overly interested in humans when they are released back out into their natural environment. So we'll wear this sort of plastic poncho, a welder's helmet, and that's what kind of disguises our human form. And then for safety, we will also wear Kevlar arm guards. Sea otters might look really cute, but they are very strong and they can potentially have the bite force of a black bear. So we have to be very careful about how we handle them. And then the other really, really cool part of our program, probably the most important part of it, is our surrogacy program. So we will actually utilize the female sea otters that we have on exhibit as the aquarium as surrogate moms for our sea otter pups. And before I kind of get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about why sea otters strand in general. Southern sea otters will occasionally run into issues with boats, with sharks. We have quite a few great white sharks off of our coastline, and they will sometimes go after sea otters, usually not intentionally, but the results can be pretty bad. Also negative interactions with humans, with fishing gear especially. The otter that is in that picture over on the left was an otter that was completely wrapped in fishing line, and it actually got so deep that it cut her completely in a complete circle around her body. Thankfully, we were able to rehabilitate her, provide her with the medical care that she needed, and she's doing well now. She actually ended up not being releasable because the scar tissue around her midsection didn't allow for fur to grow back properly, but she is doing very well in an AZA-accredited facility these days. Other reasons otters strand: disease, potentially oil spills, something called end lactation syndrome. This is where when a female sea otter weans a pup, she's so exhausted and depleted of energy that she becomes really susceptible to things like disease or injury, especially if she gets mated too soon by a male. And then we have pups. And again, this is where our program is super unique. The Monterey Bay Aquarium developed the first rehabilitation program that successfully rears and releases pups back out into their natural habitat. Sea otter pups are an especially difficult animal to rehabilitate, and that's mostly because they're incredibly dependent on their moms. So for the first 6 months to a year of their lives, sea otters depend on mom for everything from grooming to feeding to learning how to do all the things that they need to do to be an otter. So reasons that they strand include the mom being killed or injured, being separated from mom by storms or heavy sea state, mom giving birth to twins. This is something that happens pretty rarely but can happen, and if it does, then mom will usually abandon one of the pups. And again, we are the first program to successfully rehabilitate pups for release. There are other programs in the world, such as in Alaska, that rehabilitate sea otter pups, but not for release. So I'm going to go through sort of the step-by-step process that we use to take a sea otter pup from rescue to release. So from the acquisition process, the skills that we use to take care of the otters while they're in our care, some of the developmental milestones that we look for, surrogates, socializing, and then release. So the first step is rescuing the animal. So we have a hotline that I'll put up at the end of the presentation, but anyone can call in if they find an animal that is injured or in distress. Oftentimes when it's a sea otter pup, people will find them because they hear them before they even see them. Sea otter pups and their moms have a unique set of vocals that they'll use to kind of keep track of each other. It's very loud, and they're usually pretty good at using those vocals to find each other if they get separated. So often if a sea otter pup has been separated from its mom, it'll be vocalizing constantly to try to find her. So often people hear them, and that's how they find them. The first thing we will do when we get to a sea otter pup that's in distress is make a quick assessment to see if we think that the animal is healthy enough to be handled for a little bit. And then we will try our best to see if we can find mom and do a reunite. That's ultimately the absolute best case scenario, is that we can find a mom and reunite mom and pup. That's the pup's highest likelihood of survival. So if you've ever happened to see a sea otter rescue, you might have seen this kind of odd-looking scene where someone is holding up a sea otter pup, kind of like Simba. And that's to help the pup project its vocalizations and to try to see if we can locate a mom nearby that looks like she might be interested. It's pretty rare that this happens, but it does occasionally occur that we're successful in reuniting. This is a video that is... Sorry. Yeah, it's very... You can really hear the pup scream. There we go. So you can see, this is Sandrine. This is our amazing program stranding manager. So they're looking, there's a couple adult sea otters that are out in the waves. She's holding the pup up, trying to see if any of them seem receptive. And eventually, at some point, one of the adults does seem interested and starts vocalizing back.
Get this one over here calling for it.
Oh, wow.
I think these were just some bystanders that took a video.
Here she comes.
Oh, here she comes.
So it looks a little silly, but once they realize that mom is nearby and has seen the pup, Sandrine tosses the pup back in, and it takes them a second to find each other, but ultimately they do.
Where'd he go?
He's swimming.
He's swimming.
Waves can be very loud. So again, this is best case scenario. This is what we're always hoping will happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, it's not
Yeah, we got
always what
video.
happens.
Wow.
And
Safe
so if we're
reunion.
not able to relocate mom, then we will bring the pup back to the aquarium and we will acquisition them into our program. There we go. So when we bring a pup back to the aquarium, we have our amazing veterinary team that we work with. This is Dr. Mike Murray. He is the absolute medical expert on southern sea otters. And he and his whole team will help us make a health assessment of the pup, see if there's any medical treatment that the pup needs. And then the other thing that we'll do is we will actually implant a pit tag, so sort of like a microchip for a dog or cat. So this has a identifying number that will, stay with the animal for the rest of its life. And the other really cool thing about it is it has a temperature sensor in it. So we can take the temperature of the animal really easily with a scanner instead of having to do anything more invasive while the animal is in our care. This is an example of the sort of setup for one of our pups. This is our pup ICU, intensive care unit. So you can see there's a trough that we will fill with water. There's what we call a haul out. That is the dry space that we will use for our otters. Depending on how old the pup is, we might want to be able to block them off and kind of be in complete control of when we want the animal dry and when we want it in the water. So that barrier can go up and down to block the animal off. We have a ramp that we can use as the otters transition from to being able to haul themselves out or not. And then we'll have different things lining the trough, things like rocks and shells, and this stuff that we call car wash kelp. This is essentially really, really thick felt that is the same stuff that they use in car washes to clean your car. It's become kind of a funny side industry for these companies that make this felt, and they use it a lot in a lot of different zoo and aquarium enrichment scenarios, which I think is kind of cool. This is kind of a longer video, so I'm gonna have you just play it and I'll talk over it. There's no sound. One of the most important skills that our staff and volunteers that work with the animals need to have is knowing how to properly groom a pup. It's one of the things we spend the most time training because it's one of the most important aspects of the way we care for these animals. Grooming is something that moms are constantly doing with their pups when they're out in their natural habitat. Grooming helps remove debris from their coats, such as food particles, mucus, feces, and urine. It also disperses natural oils through their fur. The way sea otter fur works is it actually will trap air, little air bubbles, and so it's air that really keeps the animals insulated. So again, they don't have blubber like other marine mammals. They have this really dense fur, and it basically has sort of a dry suit effect when they're in the cold water. So when we're grooming pups, we use a variety of different towels. We also have brushes and combs that we'll use. There's a lot of strategy to grooming. This is a very young pup. This is about a week old. And you can see that this pup has what we call a pup coat. And that's that pit tag scanner. So that person is taking the temperature of the pup. So you can see it's a really just quick, easy way to do that. So yeah, when the pup's really young, they have this long, coarse, kind of lighter brown coat. That's what we call the pup coat. And this coat helps the pup float like a cork. Like if you've ever seen a really young pup floating in the water, they're like very high on the surface of the water. They'll eventually shed that longer coat after a couple weeks and grow in their adult coat, which makes it much easier for them to dive. The next aspect of rehabilitation is feeding. So if a pup comes in and it's only a couple of weeks old or younger, we will start off by giving that pup formula to mimic the mom's milk. The formula we use is essentially a powdered like puppy milk that we will mix with surf clam. So it's probably pretty gross. The next step is we will eventually start to introduce soft, solid food that's mostly commercially available seafood like surf clam, squid, and shrimp. And eventually we'll transition them to hard shelled organisms like clams and mussels and crabs. We also have a collection permit so that we can collect some of the invertebrates that we have off of our coastline, like purple sea urchins and California mussels, so that we can introduce them to food types that they will be eating once they are released back out into their natural habitat. This is an example of a feeding session. This pup is in the phase where they're eating that kind of soft, solid food. So you can see one of our staff people is feeding some clam, and they're actually feeding out of an abalone shell that we have. So in order to mimic mom like cracking something open and sharing food with their pup, we'll basically serve the food out of a little abalone shell, and we'll mimic cracking it open. You can see they're not very coordinated when they're really young. They'll start to develop more of their motor skills and be able to maneuver a little bit more easily after a couple weeks. I believe this is a 4-week-old pup. So as the pups are in our care, we are working with them directly in this manner for their first 8 to 10 weeks, and then we're going to introduce them to a surrogate mom from our exhibit. We do this because when we introduce the pups, we don't want them to be on formula anymore. The adult female they'll be paired with obviously won't be lactating, and we want them to be as independent as possible so that the surrogacy stage is more about the mom sea otter being able to just sort of teach the pup the sort of developmental skills it needs to succeed in their natural habitat. So we keep track of what we call development. So this is what we call a pup progress report. So all the pups that come through our program will have this, and these are those different milestones that we're looking at. So you can see, again, there are some really simple ones, things like uncoordinated ventral or dorsal swimming, bubble blowing. These are things that we see when they're really, really young, to more advanced things like reaching the bottom of the trough, swimming all the way along the bottom, different skills having to do with feeding. So again, we just kind of keep track of this, and we want to make sure that all of these skills are checked off by the time we introduce the pup to its surrogate mom. And that brings us to the coolest part of our program, which is our surrogacy. So there are several sea otters that we have on our exhibit program, adult females that we will borrow from time to time to introduce to our pups and utilize as surrogate moms. So when the pups are introduced, they're 8 to 10 weeks old, and then they will stay with their surrogate for about 3 to 4 months. So in order to set them all up for success, we really try to make them both as comfortable in their new environment as possible. So the pool that we introduce them in is much larger than the ICU that we have for the pups. It's a big kind of round pool up on the roof of the aquarium. We'll introduce the little pup to this pool several times on its own before we introduce the surrogate as well, and that helps make sure it's not such a scary new experience for the pup. There's a little bit of a transition process for them. We make sure that the otter that's going to be the surrogate is fed lots of extra food in the weeks leading up, so she's nice and heavy, she's not going to be stressed out, and she might be more willing to share some of her food with the pup. But in general, nothing can be forced. Sometimes a surrogacy introduction takes a few tries. Sometimes they immediately click and we start seeing maternal bonding behavior immediately. And sometimes it's not a match. And again, it's not something we can force the animals to do. It's just something that is really great when it happens. And so we'll do a lot of observing every single time we introduce a pup and a potential surrogate. Even if it's going well for the first several days, we'll be really closely monitoring their behavior to make sure everything looks like it's going okay. And then this is a video of what a great introduction looks like. This is Kit, one of our exhibit otters, and then a pup being introduced. And you'll see Kit goes after her immediately and picks her up and immediately starts smelling her, towing her around. It's probably a little bit hard to see, but it doesn't look too different than the one that was reunited with its mom in its natural habitat. And you can see the pup kind of struggles a little bit at first. It's not totally sure what's going on, and eventually it does relax. And they start grooming each other, smelling each other, and this is an example of a really great introduction right off the bat. Sometimes the exhibit otters are a little bit more aware of the camera, so sometimes they'll look right up at us. And then this is a video, I don't know if this one's gonna work, if the other one didn't work. This is another video from the YouTube series that the aquarium did. But it basically just shows some cool footage of Rosa when she was a surrogate mom. Rosa is now 24 years old and is retired from surrogacy. She successfully reared many pups in her time. But the video basically shows Rosa sharing food with the pup, teaching the pup how to dive. We also will set up sand pools at the bottom of these big surrogacy pools, fill them with rocks and different shelled organisms so that they can practice diving and foraging for some of those invertebrates and get a little bit more practice, things like that. So I think if it's not going to work, we can probably test it. And then after that, we will wean mom and pup from each other. So again, at that like 3-4 month mark, which kind of replicates the time that a pup might wean from its mom out in its natural habitat at around the 6 month mark. And then we will try our best to make sure that the animal gets to be socialized with other otters of different ages. And it's especially beneficial when we have several otters that have gone through surrogacy at around the same time, so relatively similar ages, so juvenile subadult otters that we can keep together in sort of a big cohort. And this helps make sure that they're just comfortable being around other otters outside of the surrogate mom context, so that when they are released, they're not going to be afraid of the other otters that they see or overly eager to approach all the other otters that they see. And so we will keep them together in these big tanks. And again, every single time we're interacting with them, which is usually just for feeding, we will be wearing the helmet and the poncho, so we're not associating people with anything positive. And then we can go on to the next part, which is the best part, releasing them. So when we release these otters, there's a lot that goes into tracking them during the release process. So all otters that we release will be given a unique color combination of flipper tags. They will also have a radio transmitter surgically implanted in them. And this transmitter will emit a unique frequency. It lasts about 2 to 3 years, so we can track them using telemetry during that time. And that'll be especially important in the first several weeks once we release the animals. We will track them really closely for 2 weeks from sunup till sundown, and that will be how we determine whether the release is successful, is if the animal is exhibiting appropriate behavior, is successfully foraging and eating, and doing well in those initial 2 weeks. So it's a huge coordinated effort. This is really when I talked earlier about the 2 different sides of the Sea Otter program, the Otter Care program and the research and tracking team. This is when we work really closely together, and the research and tracking team really kind of take the lead on the tracking efforts with our otters. So we'll track from shore, from boat, and even by plane. During the first 2-week period after release, we will have a pilot on retainer, so that if we can't pick up a radio signal from shore or from boat, we will actually have a pilot fly and try to help us pick up that radio signal. So it's something that is a pretty intensive process. It takes a lot of coordinating. Our veterinary team is also on standby in case we do need to try to bring the otter back. So if that happens, if we have released otters and we are noticing that they're not thriving, that they're exhibiting inappropriate behavior, if they're approaching people or if they're not eating, then we will go into recapture mode and we will do our best to try to recapture the otter and bring it back so we can treat the otter as needed. Which doesn't mean that the otter won't be released again. We might have to repeat this process a couple times in order for them to be successful. And speaking of success, these are some of the some interesting stats about our program. These numbers are actually slightly outdated. They're actually, most of them are a little bit higher, but as of the time of this slide, which was last year, we had 262 successful releases. 71 of those were surrogate reared pups. Since our program's inception, 84 animals that have gone to zoos and aquariums to be exhibit animals. If a sea otter is deemed non-releasable for any reason, they will sometimes, if we repeatedly try to release them and it doesn't work, or if a young pup needs extra care, they will sometimes the best decision is for them to go to a zoo or aquarium instead of release. And then 10 successful surrogate moms that we've had as part of our program. This is our team. So this is both the otter care and the tracking side of the Sea Otter program, and some cool action shots over on the side. I also wanted to give a shout out to the Sea Otter exhibit team. So this is the team, if you ever go and watch a Sea Otter presentation at the aquarium, you go see them feeding and being trained, this is the team that you'll see working with those otters. And so they're the ones that have to periodically give up one of the otters from their group for us to borrow for surrogacy. And then when we are done with them, we hand them back over, and they have to kind of acclimate them back to life on exhibit. And so I just wanted to give them a shout out as well. And then another incredibly important aspect of our program is our volunteer program. So we have a really, really amazing group of volunteers that are absolutely essential to our operations. Every aspect of what I showed in my presentation today is assisted by volunteers, whether it's feeding, grooming, helping with release. And we actually have 3 types of volunteers at our program. We have otter care volunteers who help with everything I just showed. Tracking volunteers who help primarily with tracking the otters once they are out back in their natural habitat, and also helping to monitor our local population. And then the real MVPs are the carcass recovery volunteers. These are the volunteers who have volunteered their time to recover dead sea otters that people call in along the coastline so that they can be brought back to the aquarium and eventually passed off to CDFW to necropsy and to learn more about. And if you are interested in becoming a volunteer with our program, you can check out Monterey Bay Aquarium's website. There are a lot of different volunteering opportunities associated with the aquarium, but there's several for the otter program in particular. And then I also just wanted to say that in general, all of the rescues that we go on all start with the public. So if you come across an injured sea otter or even a deceased sea otter, you can go ahead and give us a call. That is our hotline, that number on the bottom right. Some tips for if you do find a sick or injured sea otter, please do not approach or touch the animal. If it's possible to take photos or videos from a safe distance, that's super helpful for us. And a GPS location is also super helpful. If you call in our hotline, those will be the things that we will ask for if they're possible for you to get. And then another super helpful thing is to dissuade other people from approaching the animal. It can be kind of tough on busy beaches, on nice days, but that's another thing that can really help us out a lot. But yeah, if you do happen to find an animal, then you can go ahead and give us a call at that number. And that's my presentation. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone at Whale Fest for having me. Yeah.
How do mother sea otters take care of their pups?
That's a great question. It said, how do mother sea otters take care of their pups? They do a lot to take care of their pups. So again, they stay with their moms for the first 6 months to a year of their lives. A lot of times if you see a sea otter mom and pup, she'll be swimming on her back and she'll have the pup on top of her. So she'll actually carry around the pup quite a bit, and that keeps the pup nice and dry. And then occasionally she'll have to dive and get some food too. So when she does that, sometimes she'll either leave the pup floating for a little bit, or she might even wrap it in kelp so that it stays anchored in one place and she can go get food. Yeah. Thanks for your question.
So I found the deceased otter last year and called it in two guys, and I noticed that it had the echinochrome staining from the purple urchins on the teeth and the bones, which is really interesting to see.
Yeah.
Do you ever see that in any adults that you bring? And I know the pups, you wouldn't see it, but you see it pretty often.
Yeah, you see it. So she's talking about the echinochrome, which is the purple staining of the sea otter teeth, and actually it can get into their full skeleton. So some otters will eat so many purple sea urchins that it will actually stain their bones. And yeah, we see it in kind of a whole spectrum of levels in pups and adults. Yeah. All right. We do one more? Yeah.
I was curious if there is any of the developmental milestones that are particularly challenging for the efficacy of line to clear.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. It's kind of one of those things that doesn't necessarily, it can be kind of situation by situation whether or not the animals need to have every single one. The ones that usually happen towards the end of their time with us are things that have to do with diving, and especially with like diving and picking things up off the bottom of the tank. Those are a little bit more advanced than some of the younger otters can do, but in general, we usually see them succeed in hitting all the milestones pretty easily before we introduce. All right. Thank you.
Big round of applause for Katie. Don't go anywhere. Brilliant presentation, and as a token of our appreciation, thank you so much for all you do and for your presentation. Thank you, Katie.